Hello and welcome to Surveyor Says, the podcast from the National Society of Professional Surveyors. Each week, we bring you fascinating guests that are involved in the profession of surveying. My name is Tim Burch, and I'm the Executive Director for the National Society of Professional Surveyors and your host for the podcast. Subscribe to the podcast on most of your favorite streaming platforms, as well as our podcast host, Podbean. For more information about the podcast and NSPS, please visit our website, nsps.us.com. So, without further delay, here's our next episode of Surveyor Says, the NSPS Podcast. Hello and welcome to another episode of Surveyor Says. I'm your host, Tim Burch, and I'm in the studio for a change. I'm not on the road today. I will be back on the road soon, and we've got a lot of great stories coming up from the road. Just a lot of things going on, and we think we want to share a lot of this stuff, also leading up to our spring business meeting and the 25th annual student competition on the National Mall. But today, this is a conversation I've been looking forward to, that there's so much going on business-wise in the surveying profession, especially for a firm that's getting ready to turn over, getting ready to need some sort of succession plan, needs some help with some things. Well, my guest today is John Allen, and John's with Allen Business Advisors out of Massachusetts. And what I've known about John for several years and how he's interacted with some of a lot of the businesses in the Northeast. But he's got a unique perspective on the whole business side of things. So, John, thank you very much for joining me today. I appreciate you taking time to do this, because in this day and age, this is a very important topic, especially when we have such an older generation of business owners that are going to be looking for young people to take them over and young people to succeed them. And so, tell us a little bit about you. Tell us a little bit about the company, and how did you get hooked up with Surveyors? I mean, I can think of a lot of other people you get hooked up with, but you got hooked up with Surveyors. So tell us a little bit about what's going on with you.
Okay. Well, my name's John Allen. I'm president of Allen Business Advisors. We're a national firm that specializes in helping architects, engineers, and land surveyors sell their business to either their key employees or to an outside third party. Prior to founding Allen Business Advisors, I was a commercial loan officer. I spent 15 years in banking, and I developed a niche in financing business acquisitions. And in 2028, 2029, I had the title of commercial loan officer, but the only thing I ever did was chase deposits because of what was going on at the time. And I decided I was frustrated, and a client asked for help selling his business. So the first business I ever sold was a national training company owned by Harley Gordon. And
Nice.
there aren't that many national training companies out there. So being the banker I was, I wrote a business plan, and I decided I was going to actually target architects and engineers because I figured they're a lot more logical than other professions. That didn't turn out to be the case. However, the first business I sold was engineering and land surveying business, which is very common connection within the industry. And that led me into the land surveying niche. Initially, we started really focusing on selling to outside third parties, and that worked well. But on 3 different occasions, I sold a business, and a key employee said to me, I would have bought the business if I knew it was for sale.
Right.
And I was like, light bulb went off. Well, why am I spending all my time chasing around to find a buyer when I already have one in the company? And it really comes down to is owners would like to sell to their employees, and employees would like to buy the business. The problem is the owner believes that the employee doesn't have the money, and that's the wall stops. And from the employee's perspective, they think they don't have the money and they don't know how to get it done. What I do is I provide the roadmap and I arrange financing for the employee to buy a business. So an employee can buy a business from their employer with as little as 5% down. Now, most surveyors own their homes. They could pull out a home equity loan and there's the 5%. Think about it. you're buying $1 million business with only $50,000 down. And a lot of the times what we're seeing is more than one employee buy that business. So instead of $50,000 down to buy that $1 million business, it could be only 25,000. And let me kind of be clear.
Mm-hmm.
The banks require, SBA requires a down payment of 10%. That 10% could come from all the buyer, or it could be 5% from the buyer and 5% seller note.
Sure.
Now, banks are their own personalities, so you got to deal with the right banks.
Right.
I could tell the story later, but you need to know who to go to and really how to position the conversation. And that's how I end up here.
Exactly. Well, and I guess prior to this type of a situation and having somebody like yourself to be involved, I mean, how did businesses go about transferring or selling to employees or whatever? Because really, it seems like to me that, and especially as technology has grown, putting a value on the business. I mean, that's to me is would be part of the sticking point. The owner thinks it's worth 10 million. The employees thinks it's worth 50,000. It's finding, and I guess that to me is where I believe your business is a good middle ground for all of this. But I mean, how did businesses get sold before, in the olden days?
Well, I don't think they sold much in the olden days, because when I first started selling, I went to the New Jersey's Land Surveying Conference, ServCon, and I was educating people that businesses could be sold. So to them, initially, it was a foreign concept, so they didn't know it could be sold. However, if you went to engineering businesses, they've been buying and selling engineering businesses for a lot longer time. So I can say, look, just like an engineering business is sold, a land surveying business can be sold. Now, you
Sure.
touched upon a very important part. What's the value of my business? Every business owner wants to know that. In simple terms, a business's value is based on the amount of money the owner puts in their pocket. Now, we could do all sorts of calculations and all different multiples, but if you're starting with how much the owner puts in their pocket, you figure it could be anywhere from 2 times that to as much as 5 times that, maybe even 7. But that's when you're starting to deal with variables. So the question is, why is one business worth more than another? It really comes down to how big the business is. The larger the business is, the higher the multiple.
Sure.
The more people, the more licensed surveyors, the more money it's generating, the higher the multiple. And when we talk in smaller businesses, and I'm going to define smaller businesses for the sake of this conversation, it's 25 employees or less,
Okay.
is what they call seller's discretionary earnings or seller's discretionary cash flow. And what that basically is earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, amortization, plus the owner's salary, plus the owner's discretionary expense, times anywhere from 2 to 4, whatever that is. Now, within that, there's a lot of things that you got to uncover, such as if the owner has their spouse employed in the business, and if it was an outside third party, but it's your spouse, so you're paying them $100,000, well, you have to make adjustments. So there's a lot of calculations involved
Right.
to actually do the math. But those are examples of what's going on. Now, with a larger business, you use earnings before taxes, depreciation, amortization. And basically, what's happening is, and this is much more common with a larger firm, is they're buying a business. Because they already own a business, they're not going to step into the role of being the owner-operator. So they're going to have to hire somebody in that position. So they're going to look at value totally differently than if it's an owner-operator. So
Good.
I think
Yeah,
I
that's
explained complexities, but
no, and it is complex. I mean, this day and age, I mean, I just think about, simply buying a house and what having all the hoops you have to jump through to be able to get that done. And there again, and that's the reason there's comparative values on all the, a house, just to be able to get a baseline versus like you just said, a business. there might be this, might be the same size, it might be kind of the same operation, but depending on several other factors, one may be worth a lot more than the other one. So it's being able to establish that value. Um, yeah, because that's like I said, that's where I really think that I like the fact that having somebody independently come in, whether it's an owner to an outside purchaser, or just being that in between person between employer and employees that want to obtain the business. To me, that just seems like the more equitable, fair, more sound way to do it on both sides.
Well, Tim, it's even more than that because if I'm coming in, I'm getting paid by one party or the other. But the real decider in the conversation is the bank. The bank's the one that's putting the money in the transaction, and they actually hire an outside third-party valuation specialist to determine the value. So that means by the time you get into a close, I valued it, the internal banks valued it, and then you land on an outside third party hired by the bank on the bank's approved list before you come up with the value. So everybody's within the ballpark, but
Right.
that third person has more say than anybody else.
There you
And the
go.
bank will adjust a loan approval up or down, well, not up, but down if that value
Yeah.
doesn't come in.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, it never usually goes up. It always goes down. Um, well, let me ask you this: in this day and age, um, it- uh, there were some, I'll say, some intangibles with the businesses that used to be, in my opinion, worth a lot more. Business records, having basically a vault of surveys and all of this stuff. How much does that play into the value of a modern day business versus years ago? I mean, when the local town surveyor wanted to retire and somebody bought it up, that was worth something because you had all
Right.
of these records. With all of the stuff that's available digital and the modernization of everything, how much does that stuff factor into a purchase price these days?
It's really not a factor because you're buying a business based off of cash flow. And the records are simply a tool for that cash flow. Now, when I first started selling land surveying businesses, I was told it's worth $1 a record. And then I was told that if it's digital, it has value, and if it's not digital, it has no value. But there are people who go out there and buy records, and that I think is pretty much still the standard, $1 a record if it's digital. But
Okay.
I don't get involved in that, so I can't tell you that
Sure. Oh no,
definitively.
that's fine. Like I said, it just from days gone by that firms thought they were sitting on a gold mine when they had a whole back room full of flat files of all these plats and deeds and all this stuff, and so much of this stuff is available online, as they need it. That uh, it's just to me, it's just not the value that it used to be. But I didn't know how much that played into some of that stuff. So that's interesting to know. Um, I guess a question that has been raised with me often lately, especially with the value of everything else going up. Are we seeing a value in a surveying business? Is it? I mean, is the overall value of surveying increasing? Can we determine that somehow, or is it just, like I said, just based upon simply the numbers?
The value of a business doesn't necessarily go up or down per se. It still all goes based onto the cash flow because a person who's buying a business isn't buying the equipment. Yes, they're acquiring the equipment, they're acquiring the records, they're acquiring the employees, but the cash flow, the amount of money they expect to buy or receive, is their driving factor. Now, with that said, if you lose your employees, all of a sudden the expected value just dropped.
Right.
If you have very old equipment and that person buying your business has to replace that equipment, they're they're going to drop that price because they now need to go out and buy new equipment. So the key to selling a business is handing a functioning business in good condition over to somebody else. And the value is going to be based on the amount of money they're putting in their pocket.
Very good. Well, it sounds like to me is if you've got two businesses that are this basically the same size people and such, and we all know those businesses that will race to the bottom on their fees and things. Um, I think in just the way you're explaining it, that because that one firm that doesn't charge what they should be charging, I mean, ultimately that affects their bottom line if they want to someday go to sell because like you just said, it's the income, it's the value that they've got within their own business.
Well, that could actually be even more negative impactful than you envision because if they're reducing their price,
Okay.
they're making less money. However, if you have a firm that's looking at buying that firm and they're charging market price or premium price, well, they're not going to buy that firm because all of that client's customers are used to paying rock bottom price.
Right.
And as soon as they bring them up to market or above, they're gone. So being bottom price is not the way to win business.
Oh,
It goes
exactly.
back to customer service, a good product. And honestly, today, there's such a shortage of surveyors and the number of companies are closing. I don't see why anybody's trying to compete on price.
Yeah, that's just a mindset that I'm hoping that is kind of going the way of the dodo. Maybe, I don't know. We'll see. But and I guess that's to me that right there is a good lesson to keep in the back of their heads. Even if you think it's just to get you by getting that job today, it's going to hurt you in a lot of ways down the road. And not being competitive and not being where you should be. So that's good. Um, all right. Well, I want to with you with your financial background. I'm curious on the financing side of things. So, a business owner and his employees, they come to an agreement that they want to acquire the business, what have you. Um, what has changed in the last 10, 15, 20 years as far as financing for a business? I mean, like I said, we had the downturn in 07, 08, 09. Um, Interest rates have gone, still kind of roller coastered a little bit. Um, and lending requirements, it seems like for homeowners and such has gotten a little tougher. Um, how's it on the business side, especially when you're trying to acquire a business? How much has changed in the last generation or so?
Actually, acquiring a business has become so much easier with SBA financing than yesteryear. They've streamlined the
Really?
process. It's
Okay.
amazing. Down payment is only 10% is all they require. So let me pause here and give you some statistics.
Sure.
80% of all businesses, 70 to 80% of all businesses listed for sale don't sell.
Wow.
So when you look at the statistics of the number of businesses out there and the fact that only 20 to 30% are selling, there's forecasts out there of huge numbers of businesses that are simply closing and the number of people that are going to lose their jobs. This is a major issue. And after this article, I will send you an article from Harvard Business School and McKinsey that basically tells you what's going on with this problem, but they call it the silver tsunami. And
Okay.
if these
Yes.
businesses close, the negative impact that they will have on society in general and our economy is frightening. Now, let's get back to your specific question is by allowing an employee to buy a business with 10% down and even potentially 5% if the seller matches, that creates huge amounts of opportunity. And let me just point out that when I deal with the banks I deal with use what we call project cost, which is the price of the business plus working capital plus closing cost. So the business may cost, say, $1 million or say 1,700,000. But if you had working capital and closing costs, the filing price may be $2 million. But if you only put in 5% down, that's only $100,000 to buy a $2 million business. And typically, what we're seeing is that if an employee is buying it from the employer, it's typically one or more employees. just
Right.
because they don't have the institutional knowledge. They just don't have that skill set at the same level as the seller. So they need two people to basically do that, and then they backfill their own job.
Interesting.
And one important thing is the loan to buy the business is not to the individual, it's to the business. So the business is the borrower, not the employee. And the business, the cash flow from the business repays that business loan.
Okay.
So the individual, the owners, provide a personal guarantee, which states that we're going to run and operate this business profitably and not just take out all the money. So that person's household cash flow is unaffected. Second thing of importance is the banks that we use, if you have less than 25% equity in your home, the bank's not going to put a lien on your home. So for a small down payment and basically a guarantee that you're going to run the business and keep everything going, you're buying a business for as low as 5%. That didn't happen years ago. Before they
Okay.
wanted 30% down. In fact, today most banks still want 30% down.
Sure. Sure. Well, this is good information because I think that's part of what's holding people back from looking at investing in a
Right.
business and just simply throwing their own shingle up sometimes. And with unfortunately with a lot of the startup costs and all of these things, if you're buying into an existing business that has a client list, that has a little bit of backlog, that has employees, additional employees, whatever. To me, that's just such more of a running start than just going, yep, put my shingle up and hope for the best.
Well, buying a business has the least amount of risk because you have clients, employees, customers, systems, processes all in place. If you start a business, you have none of that. Everything you predict is based on what you're guessing what it's going to be. Where if you bought a business, you could see historical cash flow, you could get a bank loan, and within that business that you're buying, it's already built a salary for you to live on. As opposed to starting a business, it's like whatever you hunt and kill, that could be your
Yes,
salary.
that's a great way to put it. Yes, yeah, you're going to go sing for your supper, definitely. Um, I guess one other thing I was curious about, without barking up too many wrong trees here, is if it's a sole proprietor owns the business there with lots of employees. Um, I know there's been a little bit of I won't say a push, but a little bit of a trend towards uh, employee owned stock, the ESOPs. Is there any type of situation with when creating the purchase, creating the financing that a group of individuals can come forward and do something like that, or is it just more of just a partnership buying out an individual?
Okay, well, let me start by saying that ESOP is absolutely great program. There's huge tax advantages. It came around in 1974, and there's about 7,000 ESOPs in the United States. Um, from my perspective, and this is probably most of your listeners, the ESOPs are a great program. However, they require the seller to invest at least $150,000 upfront,
Hmm.
and then they're financing anywhere from 60 to 70% of the purchase price. Plus, there's ongoing expenses. So, from our perspective, ESOPs are a great program that's targeting firms that have basically 100 employees or more. Firms that have less than that find it cost prohibitive.
Okay. Well, that's good information because, like I said, I've seen more and more companies that are, that's one of the I'll say one of the marketing hooks on their employment ads is come in and be part of an ESOP. And like I said, I was curious from a financial perspective, and that's good to hear that. Yeah, they are a good deal, but it does have to have the right structure and the right amount of people to do it. Um, I guess part of what I wanted to and I'm trying to be cognizant and respectful for your time as well. Um, well, if somebody is out there, say a younger surveyor is out there, and there may be a few area regional survey businesses for sale, where do they start? What are some of the first things they need to be doing before they entertain approaching a business about potentially purchasing them?
If somebody's looking to buy a business, and they own a home, the very first thing they need to do is to get a home equity loan to as close to possible so they only have 20% equity. Right away, that stops a bank from putting a lien on their homes. They take that money and they put it in a bank account. Now the bank sees where their money's coming from to buy the business. So that's the first thing they do. Second thing is there's a lot of surveyors out there based on age. They approached the surveyor and simply said, I'm interested in buying a business. Um, I've talked to somebody like John Allen, who's given me some directions as to how to go about doing it, and he'll be an advisor and consultant. And I could pay you almost all of the money at the close. Are you interested in selling the business? Um, and you tell the business owner very upfront, although John's going to value it, the ultimate price will not exceed what the bank's willing to finance. And when the person's hearing that the bank is really the dictator of the value, and that's being valued by a professional, all of a sudden it strengthens the concept. Plus, they're hearing cash at close, which is typically not the way it's been done.
Okay. Well, very good. Well, yeah, because I know of I know of several businesses that have done this over the years. That it without this type of situation, it's taken years for the owner to get their money out of the business.
Yes.
That they didn't have these types of financing of options and opportunities available. That um, it's almost like the owner was crossing your fingers that business was going to stay good, they were going to stay healthy, and things were going to continue on. Um, but here, this sounds like there's just so much more financial opportunities and a lot more solid footing for the
Right.
businesses to go forward on.
Yeah. Yeah. What you described of the seller financing, we've described as the parent loan because it's something that
Great.
you would do for a son or a daughter. And if it goes right, life's great. And if it doesn't, you take it on the chin. Now, the other side of that coin is I've seen businesses where sellers are willing to sell it and be the bank. But then what happens is because somebody owes them $1 million, whatever that figure is, they then want to control and manage that, which means that that new owner really doesn't have control to manage it. And that becomes problematic as well.
Oh yes, exactly. No, that's yeah, and I've seen that happen over the years. That yeah, the former owner um, is still holding the purse strings just simply because of the debt obligation. You're absolutely right.
Yes.
So, well, typically, what I ask the surveying guests is my final wrap up question is, how does the future of surveying look to you? I'm going to spin it a little bit, John. I'm going to ask, how does the future of businesses in surveying look to you? And I guess with the caveat of where do we need to go? What needs to happen to make sure that surveying still stays um, moving in a positive way, and that we're not losing out on these businesses going away. It's like it kind of seems like it has been, but we try to keep as much strength within the businesses as we can.
Well, I think the challenge we need to do is bring younger people into the industry. I've heard the statistic multiple times from multiple people that the average age of a surveyor is 68 years old and 72 on the East Coast. That means younger people are not coming into the industry. We need to do what we can to bring people into the industry. Um, I've had times where I've seen some beautiful businesses, But if there's no young people that are in their 30s or 40s or even 50s that want to buy your business, it doesn't matter how great it is, you're done. Um, and until we get that corrected, that's a problem with the industry. We need to get more people licensed. We need to provide incentives. We need to just let people know, because surveying is part of the real estate industry, which is 15 to 17% of the nation's GDP. If projects can't get done without surveys, that's going to be very impactful to this country beyond the industry.
You're absolutely right. And, one thing NSPS has done, looking at our membership, at the city level, we've never plotted this out to, we know where your front door is, but at the city level, we've plotted where all of our members are. And it's just amazing. There's just so many, there's places throughout the country where might not be a surveyor for 2 or 3 counties away. And we've actually taken several calls from several counties, municipalities, from the Chamber of Commerce that have said, hey, how can we reach a surveying business to come to our town, because there's nothing within 2 hours of here. Somebody could come in here and just set up a small survey business and never have to worry about work again in their life, because there's nothing else around. So I'm hoping that we're able to connect the dots on a few of these older firms that are looking to continue, and young people that are looking to be enterprising. I mean, that's part of the American dream, is to run your own show. And this sounds like for a surveying profession viewpoint, this sounds like a great way to go.
Even the surveyors, I've seen situations where land surveyors are getting paid more than engineers now.
Yes, that is very true. It's coming around. As long as that surveyor truly values the service that they're giving and charges for that appropriately, yes, there's no reason why a surveyor can't make a very, very good living in what we're doing. So, well, John, thank you very much. I appreciate your time today. This has been a very enlightening topic for us to cover, because I think obviously it's out there a lot more than people want to admit. I'll tack on another statistic for you that, we're, based upon all the data we're looking at, somewhere between 45 and 60% of the surveyors that are licensed right here and now are going to retire or attrition in the next 10 years, plus or minus. That's a lot of surveyors, and some sooner than others. But that is a big chunk of surveyors that are going to be, going on to that next phase of their lives, and we've got to have the people to backfill them, which means to me opportunity, lots of opportunity. So we've got to keep trying to do that, and you're the man to help us find those businesses to put them together.
It'd be my pleasure. I appreciate you taking the time. Thank you.
Oh, absolutely. And we appreciate you and the business coming on as a sponsor of NSPS, because this is a critical piece of the business that we need to be able to connect those dots. So be on the lookout for more stuff out of John. He's going to be putting some articles together. I'll be honest with you, this has been a fascinating conversation. I would like this. We're probably going to sit down and do this again on maybe some other things down the road, but be on the lookout for stuff from John, because this is a lot of great information, especially if you're an older surveyor looking to get out of your business, if you're a younger surveyor thinking, I'd sure like to control my own destiny, and this might just work out. So, all right, well, that'll wrap it up for this episode of Surveyor Says. Wherever you listen to your podcasts, hit that subscribe button, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks. You've been listening to Surveyor Says, the NSPS podcast, brought to you by the National Society of Professional Surveyors. If you have any questions about today's episode or any other topic, please email us at info@nsps.us.com, as we are here to help. Subscribe to the podcast on most of your favorite streaming platforms, as well as our podcast host, Podbean. For more information about the podcast and NSPS, please visit our website, nsps.us.com. And remember, it's a great day to be a surveyor.